All right, welcome to Career Series with Sit Reps to Steer Codes. I'm here with a highly esteemed guest, Stephen Spake. Introduce yourself, Spake.
What's up, man? My name is Stephen Spake. I am about to wrap up my MBA at Georgia Tech. I spent almost 10 years in the Army. I was actually this nerd's platoon sergeant at one point.
He was.
So we have a little bit of shared trauma there. And Wyatt asked if I could make myself available to help some transitioning non-commissioned service members uh, into the civilian career field, maybe into MBA programs, and just do my best to provide some non-officer, no bullshit answers to questions people may have. So that's what I'm here for.
Exactly. So, first, like you said, you suffered through a certain commander that who will not be named, but you've
We
had
can't
a
name him.
pretty rather not. People
All
people
right,
can go look
fine.
that up.
I'll name him. Slide in
Um,
my DMs. I'll name him out. That dude
okay.
sucked.
So, why don't you just talk to us about kind of why you joined the military, what you did in the Army, and yeah, we'll talk about that first, and then obviously your schooling is not a new thing. I don't think I've ever known you where you haven't been going to school, but why don't you just lay the background down? You in the Army.
Sure. So I grew up in the middle of East Jesus, nowhere, Florida. Was a decent student through high school, all that jazz. Did undergrad at UCF, and my dad was fourth generation Army, served in Vietnam, and he always made me promise that I would go to college and not join the Army. That was like our deals. I was going to break the trend. I was going to go to college. I was going to be a good civilian and do whatever. So I finished undergrad, did a little bit of med school, hated it, and then joined the Army. And to really cap off my father's frustration, all in love, I enlisted with a couple bachelor's degrees under my belt. And he was just like, not only did you go to college, you joined the Army, and then you enlisted like an idiot. So like, well done checking those boxes. So
After almost doing med school.
no, I was in med school. I just hated it. And also I was not super wealthy. And that really kind of puts a hitch in the giddy up of going to med school if you don't have
Uh,
the availability for student loans and whatnot. And also, I didn't really want to be a doctor. Like, I didn't know what I want to do. Um, but I was a nerd all through high school and was like, I want to do something cool. I want to be a badass. So to the Army I went. I walked into my recruiter station and said, hey, I want to be a medic. They had me take the ASVAB. They were like, cool, you can be a medic. And I went to basic like 3 weeks later. So I went
and
through that,
then
AIT at Fort Sam, um, airborne school at Benning, and then spent a lot of time at Bragg. Spent a little bit of time in Alaska, which is where I met you, and then evacuated to BSB, to Fort Benning for a couple years, and then Chuck Deuces. I was done.
yeah, so you had a couple deployments to Afghanistan, right? You didn't do Iraq.
I was around, yeah.
Yeah, so you had a pretty long and storied Army career.
I don't know about storied. I mean, they're shitty stories too. So
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, and NCO stories that I'm sure if people slide in, they can hear about that. But
oh yeah,
you decided to go to school again and again while you were in the
yeah,
Army. So
that is true.
that's something that you see a lot of guys getting like leadership degrees or kind of the easiest option that you can find. You opted to try to do something a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Why did you go to school and what school did you go to?
Um, so I started while I was at Bragg. I started, it was Kaplan at that point. So I had a couple bachelors from UCF in microbiology, neurobiology, did a third in healthcare administration while I was at Bragg, just kind of out of boredom. And someone said, hey, you have this, tuition assistance available. And as someone who had to like pay out of pocket to go to school previously, I was like, cool, someone's going to pay for me to go to school. I like school. I'll just do it. Um, so got my third bachelor's at Bragg, and then kind of took a pause because of deployments and things like that. And it was really over COVID while I was at SVAB. where like I didn't have anything to do. We were locked down. They scrubbed our deployment. And I basically just stayed at home for 8 months. Like I would PT in the morning, that did nothing. I was like, ah, I'm bored. So I went to Purdue, Purdue Global, which is accredited through Purdue. It's kind of cool. They kind of bought out Kaplan, and looked through what I could do after carrying on with healthcare administration. And I've always been a math nerd. And they offered a master's in healthcare administration with a concentration in epidemiology. So that's kind of like the intersection of like biostatistics and public policy, which are things that I found and still kind of find interesting. Not that I'm, super stoked to admit that. But I thought it was cool. So I did my first master's in epidemiology and decided to do an MBA when I got out of the Army. I think I made the choice a lot of people did, kind of at that halfway mark in the career. It's like, do I want to do this forever, or do I want to get out? Um, so that's really my educational pathway. And honestly, I never told anyone in the Army that I went to college because day zero at my unit at Fort Bragg, man, there was one staff sergeant who was just he was an idiot. And he smoked me for an hour and a half because he asked if I went to college, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I have some bachelor's degrees." I didn't say man, I said yes, sergeant. And man, he
So that's
scuffed
why
me
he
up.
smoked you, because you called him
No,
man.
yeah, no, I didn't do that. But yeah, he scuffed me up for like an hour and a half, uh, telling me that I wasn't better than he was because I went to college. And I was like, oh, no, I know that. I think I'm better than you are because you're obviously an asshole. I didn't tell him that again because it wouldn't have helped my situation. But yeah, so after that point, I didn't tell anyone I went to college until I got like E5 looking at E6. And, I was going to my E6 board, and my sponsor was like, do you have any college or anything? It's not on your SRB. And I was like, yeah, I do, but I'm not putting it on my SRB because the only time I get really fucked up here is when, or messed up, sorry, is when I tell someone I went to college. So like, I'm not saying anything. But he squared me away. Sergeant Roman was a dude that squared me away on the college stuff on the SRB and was like, no one's going to hate you. That guy was an idiot. So shout out Sergeant Roman. So yeah, that's
So
my path.
how did you kind of deal with, when you're getting out of the Army? We all have tunnel vision, obviously, when we're sitting in the Army. How did you deal with this bias against education, against kind of, this enlisted mentality that you're describing? How did you see past that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, saying enlisted mentality is a little bit ridiculous. It becomes an individual mentality, and if you happen to be enlisted, so be it.
Hmm.
So I don't want to say that there's necessarily an enlisted mentality other than understanding you're going to be the one doing the work. So I'm going to catch you on that one and say that it's an individual decision to make that call or not make that call, and it should be based on research and support from all degrees. A big factor was again, a lot of people talk a lot of shit about SFAB. I was fortunate enough to have a pretty good experience with it, and it's so dependent on what team you're with. My commander at the time I was on a headquarters team, so my basically first line officer was a colonel, a light colonel, Colonel Ryan Morgan, who is also out now. He and I had some conversations about that just in terms of development because he took a pretty good hand in making sure his guys got developed, which was cool to see out of a field grade. Um, and he was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, honestly, I don't know. Like there's a lot of options out there. Um, my team is great, but I'm surrounded by idiots, and I don't want to spend the rest of my career surrounded by idiots, both on the officer side of the house and the NCO side of the house. Um, it came down that my next duty assignment, regardless of my what I had done previously, was going to be like an instructor position. So that was immediately a no because I didn't want to move to Texas. And again, in COVID, I really never understood what it was like to be a civilian because I went right from high school to college. I had to work all through college. I worked as a surgical assistant in a couple of hospitals in Florida, right to the Army. I never knew what it was like to, have a stable social circle or like go out with people or like enjoy life a little bit. Um, so over COVID, I got to hang out with my then girlfriend, now wife, here in Atlanta and actually see what it was like to have a reliable social circle, or to, feel comfortable that you're not going to get a call at 12 p.m. It's like, hey, someone got, arrested, go get them out of jail. So it was just a different perspective to view life through. It's like, oh man, this is pretty cool. And then also in consideration of salaries outside of the military, I was like, man, it'd be cool not to be poor.
And
Um,
you're not poor anymore.
I am comfortable in my career. My credit score jumped about 300 points since my ETS date, which is dope.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, right. It's
Yeah,
either really awesome now or really bad then.
I won't make you put your employer on blast and recite your total comp, but for anyone watching, if you've seen NBA average salaries, it's north of that. So you figured out how to get out and do something that I think coming out of the military, officer enlisted or whoever it might be, there's a feeling of, hey, you've got to jump down a level. You've got to, go and kind of like, take a job that maybe you don't want in a place that you don't want, doing something that is going to be making 70 to $80,000 a year. And you definitely starting day one figured out how to get around that. How did when you got out of the military, I won't make you put your previous employer on blast as a consultant. But you got out of the military and were pretty highly paid from day one. And how did you make that happen, and how did you decide on where to go?
I know you're not for putting people on blast. I'm not going to put them on blast, but like, I'm a transparent person. I got out of the army and immediately started working for Accenture. And I will say, there are positives to everything else. There's negatives. I will say I appreciate them being willing to give me a good career, a good job, right out of the gates of the army. So I appreciate that. Um, it was not a good fit for me in multiple, segments, and I'm very thankful to work where I do now. So I did dabble as a project manager and a consultant for Accenture, for about a year and a half. And honestly, I don't know. I applied to everywhere, man. Like, it was legitimately a struggle. So even with three bachelor's degrees, one master's degree,
Yeah,
coming out of the army, I applied to almost 600 positions. I had three interviews, and I only had one company offer to hire me. It just so happened that it was Accenture, and I guess with almost 800,000 global employees, they can afford to take an L. So maybe it was a good gamble for them.
it's it's
Um,
it's pretty amazing seeing. I mean, I'm here at Wharton. You're at Georgia Tech. Both very good MBA programs. The amount of rejection that you get as a vet or as a person in general. I mean, it's not just unique to veterans. This is every classmate of mine that has, even the ones getting the best job offers go through 30 to 50 rejections. And the amount of
yeah.
emails that you get, just saying nothing more than we've reviewed your application. We regret to inform you you're not selected, and they send it like 5 months after you apply.
Or like
Um,
30 minutes after, and it was like,
that's also true.
bullshit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Several of these tech companies, I think, see military and know that you don't know how to design software. It can be very difficult. How did you feel? I mean, were there moments of doubt where you thought, man, maybe I should have gone, you know, done 20 years?
Absolutely. I was talking to a buddy of mine who was an Air Force recruiter, and I was like, hey, so how's PJ looking? Like, I could do that. I'm already jump qualified. I like a beating. Like, let's go. Um, but it was just a matter of like, I really didn't want to do that. I really liked waking up and going to the gym on my terms, and moving through my day on my terms. Um, so I knew I didn't want to go back in. And it was just persistence. Like, it's super frustrating. And the hardest part for me is, I'm an NCO. Like, if I have a problem with someone, I want to go find them. I want to put them at parade rest and solve it. But you can't do that because everything is done through a damn computer. I tried hiring fairs, and I feel like I loathed pretty much everyone I encountered through those processes. And it's part of it is maybe I'm not a people person. I'm not like super peoply. I can be, but it's a facade. I just want to be in a position where I can go in and do my work. Um, so it took a lot of luck, and it took a really random act of networking to get me in the position that I'm in now. That's incredibly appropriate for me, and that I really enjoy. It was uh, the wife of a friend's mom who we were just happening to have drinks with one night. She was like, "Oh, I know people at this healthcare company in Alpharetta. Let me put you in touch." And within 24 hours, I had one of the recruiters calling to set me up with what ended up being 7 interviews for the position. So thank you, Sandy, for that one. And it was just happenstance. So it was a little bit of dumb luck and a whole lot of persistence. And like it wasn't easy, man. Like you could ask my wife about it. Like I was so frustrated because it just felt like, I guess with the army, there's different selections and there's boards and there's like, trials and things like that to get to certain places. And that doesn't exist in the civilian world, like at least for what I was doing. Like I can't, there's not an in-person audition. Like I can't beat someone at a 12-mile ruck and win this desk job. So that was the hardest part, is knowing that like, you know, I'm probably better than the next candidate, but some computer is telling me that I'm not qualified.
Yeah,
Uh,
the
and
randomness of the civilian world is very frustrating, I feel like. For
yeah,
those of us that come from the military, where there is a system, at worst you have someone at HRC that you have to figure out how to call, but there's a person that you can identify. And as inefficient as it is, there's, I mean, civilian organizations, you can just get lost in the recruiting database.
yeah.
Be very hard. How did you figure out? I mean, obviously you're at a very good job right now. You just got a promotion even, so you're performing well at that job. But your first job at Accenture, how did you figure out how to get past those 600 rejections, and push through that, and then eventually land that job? I mean, what tools did you use? What did you what landmines did you encounter that other people should be aware of that prevented you from
Like
finding jobs before that?
I feel like I really didn't encounter too many. I just found a human being on the other side of the house that was kind of invested in seeing me be successful. So one of the hiring managers for the position was an MD at Accenture. He happened to be a retired full bird from the Guard and working as an MD, and was just like, "Hey, I saw your army. Tell me about it. Like, can what have you managed in the past? Like, can you manage, rapidly changing environments? Because I worked specifically in like agile focused consulting." So we were kind of like short term, kind of like the QRF of the consulting world, where if someone was having a problem, we just threw people at it that weren't stupid and see if we could fix it. But he just happened to be on that team and saw my resume and took a chance. So I honestly am not super sure what I would have done. I had played around with the idea of packing some bags and going to Ukraine through Poland, because my ETS date started like 3 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, um, just to do something while I was on terminal leave until I heard back from someone. Um, but they hit me up about a week before I was ready to buy a plane ticket, and sent me an offer letter. So a lot of it was luck.
What
And
resources were you able to use? If you were talking to other enlisted vets, um, what resources are available to them? I mean, officers too. Most of this is, it's not unique to enlisted soldiers, but
man, there's honestly not a whole lot, because like coming out, they make you do SFL tap or whatever Scrabble game they've named it now, and that was, so I've never gotten a colonoscopy, but I imagine I would volunteer for the colonoscopy rather than go through that again. It was the most useless group of information I've ever encountered in my military career, and I have had multiple interactions with range control. It was terrible. They had a guy who was like, and I'm not, no age bias, he was 70 years old. He brought in like Microsoft Word on Windows XP to like show us how to do a resume, and how to convert our ERB or SRB or whatever it was at that point into a resume. It was terrible. It was just a waste of my time.
and
So
tell me
that
how
wasn't.
how much did Accenture care about your SRB?
Oh, absolutely not at all. They were
How,
just
how much
happy that
how
I
much
could
did they
form complete
care?
sentences.
How much did they care about your badges and your ribbons?
Probably, probably more than I did, which is not a whole lot. Like it's just
Yeah.
other decorations.
I mean, I think the Army really gets us into a frame of mind of thinking about how can I fill these boxes, right? I can go to air assault school. That's only 14 days. I can go to the Lean Six Sigma. I can do this stuff. And like if I fill it with enough trinkets, HRC will see that. They'll prioritize, which in the military is largely true. Um, what did you feel? I mean, how were you evaluated when you were at Accenture and now as well?
I'll actually go on a quick aside because you brought up air assault school and badges. So
Okay.
one of my proudest accomplishments in my military career actually happened at DeGlopper Air Assault School. I didn't graduate. I got an NTR because I fussed out one of their black hats with my sergeant major right next to me, and then my sergeant major coined me. One of my favorite military stories, and the only coin I just adore.
Did you ever
So
graduate air assault?
no, I couldn't go. They banned me from the damn school.
Oh,
Um,
you
yeah, but
you
I
missed
got the
out on a
coin.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
you
sure it was the
missed out
hardest
on
10 days in the army, whatever. Rope jockeys. Uh, back to Accenture and badges. Yeah, it's interesting. I will say it's hard to look good on paper because everyone looks good on paper. Whether you could embellish the hell out of a resume, just like you can
people will
at a
just lie, right?
yeah. So I think a lot of it is just understand how to have a conversation, and it's really interesting because about a year into that role, I was in a position where I was interviewing candidates for a contractor or for a couple contractor positions to work under me, and it was honestly really helpful to get a good idea of what looks good and what doesn't look good in an interview from the interviewer side, not necessarily the interviewee side. So that was probably beneficial for learning a little bit more about how to properly interview as having to conduct them. But yeah, as soon as I walked off Benning on my last day in the army, like my ERB became irrelevant. Um, I'm sure people may feel differently about that, but it's just it became how do I present myself as a person rather than how do I present myself. I don't even like to present myself as a veteran. I'm just a human being that has happened to serve in the army. Um, and I try to respect it, but not base my personality off of it. So like the
Yeah.
first year and a half, 2 years I was out of the army, I didn't do any veteran related stuff. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to define myself by it. Didn't want to be a bro vet. Didn't want to have a multicam hat with their ERB
You
pins on
weren't
it all over the
you weren't
place.
you weren't starting a coffee brand?
No, I mean I would be down for some. I would, I'm not against that. Go
It
for it, but
wouldn't
I'm
it
not
wouldn't be
like
it wouldn't be like Medic Space coffee.
yeah, yeah, it would not be. It wouldn't be a military. I don't know. Like, but that's just me. Like, if you want to do that, people do that and they're super successful with it. And like, go for it. I am be empowered. I just don't want to. That's just not me.
So, how did you take your experiences as a medic, as an enlisted soldier, and translate those in a way? Because like you said, people can embellish their resumes. I would advise against
Mhm.
that because it's going to be very difficult to
Uh-huh.
explain your resume if it's a lie. But when you sit down for an interview, um, the fact is that people already have a bit of a bias against military vets, right? They think, okay, this person's never managed real budgets,
I don't.
which
I
is
don't think that's
true.
necessarily true. I don't think that's necessarily true. And
Okay,
I'm
I
sorry to
like
disagree with you on your
I like
pulpit.
this. I like the
But I'm
pushback,
here
but
for you.
but what how do you sit down and explain your story and describe yourself in a way that doesn't encounter a bias?
Yeah. So
And push back. I want to hear kind of your disagreement on this.
the only legitimate military pushback I have ever received in an interview was actually from Georgia Tech, the Georgia Tech Research Institute. Someone with a neck beard and three chins told me I see you trying to smile. Told me
I
that
am
my
smiling. Yeah.
told me that my military service didn't count as years of experience because I wasn't a commissioned officer. So if I didn't loathe some of you enough already, that's just icing on the cake. That is the only negative bias I've ever had, which is unfortunate because I really wanted to work for GTRI. They do cool shit. But I think sometimes it's misconstrued. Bias is misconstrued for curiosity, or curiosity is misconstrued for bias.
Sure, sure.
And
And maybe I should reframe that as not, it's not that they're biased, it's just that someone would look at a military resume and say, this looks great. Thank you for your service. You seem like you have a lot of good skills, but you know, I don't really understand how to translate this. I need someone that I know can make an impact day one. And there's a lot of they're taking a risk on someone that, granted, we haven't managed a P&L. We haven't done hiring, firing.
yeah,
So it can be a difficult to explain that, yes, we do have skills and explain those. So yeah, I mean, how were you able to do that in a way that made you stand out and that continues
well,
to make you stand out?
I just took the headline and put that I was prior soft submariner fighter pilot.
Oh, aviate, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
no.
Yes, I'm sure you loved that. You know,
Oh
there's no
God.
way that
So
a
that's
there's no way a medic could ever contribute meaningfully to a business, right?
no, never. So it's interesting. The first thing I would advise against is paying anyone on LinkedIn that says they're going to fix your resume for you, because that's a damn lie. I tried working with some organizations that are focused on optimizing veterans' resumes, and I didn't have a whole lot of success with them either. What I ended up doing was I understood what I kind of wanted to do and in the industry that I wanted to be in. So I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. I knew I didn't want to work patient care. Despite all the certs and credentials I have, I got tired of having people's goo on me and I didn't want to be near it. I knew that I was good in operations. I knew I was good in project management. I knew I could figure out running small and medium sized teams pretty easily. So what I did was I looked for veterans in my industry that kind of had roles that I was interested in through LinkedIn, and I connected with them. And I was like, "Hey, my name is Steven. I'm getting out of the army. I know how to use complete sentences. I'm having some questions with my resume. Like, do you mind sharing your resume, or could you set some time aside with me?" If they were local, I was like, "Hey, do you want to get a beer? Because that's my love language, you know." Um, and I tried to work like peer to peer with someone in the industry so I could base what I was trying to project my past experience being on something that has been previously successful in a measured quantity. So that's what I did. Everyone approaches it different. I don't know if it was right. Like, this is my second grown up job. I like it. It's a good job.
It pays
But
quite well.
I live
I'd
comfortably.
consider it a success. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you're underselling it. It's very cool to see. What would you tell the enlisted veterans? One of the squad leaders I had, you didn't overlap with them in Alaska. Sergeant Fan. He uh he got out as an E5 and actually just finished at Wharton. Also worked at Accenture, actually, strangely enough, before his MBA.
Poor bastard.
But well, he doesn't work there anymore. But
Uh,
he said that there was always a fear that even if someone didn't ever display bias, there was always a fear that, oh, someone will find out I'm enlisted and think a certain way about me. And Fan, like yourself, was smarter than 90% of the officers that I've ever met. But how
like
would you talk to an
95.
enlisted soldier that said, look, I'm worried about this. I'm scared to tell anyone that I'm enlisted. I don't know how to explain what I did, right? Um, what would you tell to someone?
Yeah, and it sounds super dumb, but like, have you ever gone through a live fire exercise where you like weren't totally sure if your platoon sergeant or your PL knew what they were doing? And like, as a
Or my
private,
company commander?
I would not have gone anywhere near him during a live fire exercise. I remember he shot a bunker during a qual. Um, so
He shot a
anyway,
piece of wood.
like,
He shot the
yeah,
barrier.
I remember. I remember. Also, as long as we're talking about this, I knew that Wyatt, for anyone watching this, so like all four people that'll see it, I knew that Wyatt and I were going to be friends when I think one day this commander had a tendency to pass his rifle off to a private or one of my guys or something like that to put it back in the arms room. That always pissed me off. And I think it was you. One day you walked in on me just cranking his zero all the way off on his ACOG before I put his weapon back into the cage. And I made a point to do that at every single opportunity when he gave his someone else his weapon to clean and put away. So like every time we would go back to the range, and he would wonder why it took 2 hours to qual again. It's because I fucked up your zero, sir.
I love that
My
story. Yeah.
I hate him so much. So I think in that situation, back to like, what do you do if you're uncomfortable? Like you look at your buddy next to you, you look at the guy on the saw and be like, all right, fuck it, let's go. And that was kind of how I approached it, where like, I am who I am, fuck it. Let's see what happens. Just be who you are. I think the worst thing you could do is present yourself as something you're not. And then you get 6 months into a position and they're like, they expect you to be like, you know, Peter Pocket Protector, and that's just not who you are. Because you're enlisted, and sometimes you pick your nose, and sometimes you want to put a dip in. So just be you, and don't misrepresent yourself.
What skills, when you look at yourself as an enlisted veteran versus an officer, what are the unique things, that someone from the enlisted side of the house can bring to an organization that maybe us as officers, don't have? And I think I have several opinions on that.
All right. Um, so I think like you and I have always talked about going into business on something together, and that I would kind of be like your blue collar reference check. Um, and I pretty firmly hold that NCOs work better than any other group, be it military or not. We know how to put the hammer down and get something done. And I think that's step one is understand that I think from my perspective, my biased perspective, officer side of the house, you're a leader, you're in charge, you set the order. From the NCO side of the house, when you get to like staff sergeant, sergeant first class, you understand how to set the order and how to take that and how to actually get something done with it. Um, I also think that like in a normal like line platoon, it's your senior NCO's job to go to your officer and be like, I don't think that's going to work. I think we may have to adjust this. I think this is a bad idea, or I think this is an improper work volume. The same happens in civilian realm as well. And don't be afraid to push back a little bit. If your boss is worth a shit, if you push back on something that they suggest, they're going to appreciate that. Just like you would appreciate if you're a platoon sergeant and if your squad leader pulls you aside respectfully and says, hey, maybe this isn't the best, or maybe let's do it this way, or I have an idea. Like if you're a good leader and you're, emotionally intelligent and tuned in with your team or squad or platoon or whatever, you're going to take that feedback and you're going to use it to grow. You have those AARs for a reason. Be receptive to feedback,
Yeah.
but also willing to provide it. I would also say that as far as like person to person leadership, I think NCOs have the edge there because that you understand, and any NCO is worth a damn are innately emotionally intelligent enough to have a one-on-one conversation with someone and continue to work to develop them. In my head, an officer development is like, all right, we've got all these red blocks on a PowerPoint slide. Let's make them green as they go through, whatever learning system the Army is using today. Whereas, that NCO, they're the one in the dirt, showing dudes how to put on a tourniquet, showing people what their fields of fire are, showing people how to do a sketch. So I think we have a little bit more hands-on version of leadership and development, um,
Yeah.
more so than officers. Also, we don't get
Yeah.
lost
Yeah. Yes.
or lose
Um,
our pistols.
or lose pistols. So, the enlisted side, I think, one thing I've noticed coming, and obviously, I have a full 2 years of experience being a civilian, so not as extensive. But one thing vets and civilians that I've talked to talk about with vets is that we as a population in general are much better at making a decision and executing, right? Kind of that violence
Officers
of action. The veterans in
or
general,
military
right?
in general. Okay, cool.
Military in general compared to civilians.
Yeah.
Civilians are, conditioned to be a little bit more risk averse. In the military, is as bureaucratic as it is, the military will let you do things like, stick your legs out the side of a helicopter and jump out of airplanes that civilian sector, would never let you do, right? Because of liability. And as an officer, you learn from a much more strategic level. And like you said, your interactions with soldiers are primarily E6 to E5. You aren't mentoring the young, junior enlisted
Yeah.
the way that an NCO is. And like you said, that because you can't fire people in the military, you have to learn how to motivate and how to push. And I think that
Or you put them on
that
gate
really
guard.
you can also, yes. I mean, instead of if someone's a lost cause, I think you also figure out how to manage them out. But I think that the enlisted have that to an even greater degree, just the ability to execute. And being in the civilian sector, you realize very quickly that violence of action and that understanding that, the 80% plan done 100% is better than a 100% plan done 80%. Um, the enlisted soldiers understand that even more so than officers do. Though I think that veterans in general are have that as a skill. I think that's one of the reasons that they are valuable to organizations. Um, what you also you haven't talked about the other revenue stream, aside from VA disability, which I'm sure you'd also tell any veteran to make sure that you are filing your VA disability. That's a huge help. Um,
Yes.
but you also have another revenue stream, which is very different than anything you've talked about. How did
Yeah.
that start, and how did you continue to do that in the military, and what's become of that?
Um, so it goes way back actually. So I run a wedding and elopement photography, videography organization. And now I have branched into doing like boudoir photography as well with my wife who shoots with me. So it's a super dope thing. It starts way back in World War II. We're going to go down a rabbit hole here. So my grandfather was an airborne one of the few airborne combat photographers in World War II. He jumped Normandy and Holland. I think he also jumped Sicily, but as a photographer. He had the cover of National Geographic magazine, Time magazine, Look magazine, all in the same year. And if you actually go through Fort Liberty, a lot of
What's his name?
his name was Robert Hall Spake. Um, so I don't know much about his military career. I have his uniform at home. My dad does. Um, but if you walk around Liberty, like in CIF or a whole bunch of other buildings, specifically Third Brigade, our headquarters has a lot of his pictures and prints up on the walls there, which is cool. And I still have all his like giant prints back home in Florida, or my dad does. So he was a photographer. He got my dad into photography, and then when my dad went to Vietnam as a door gunner on Huey's, my dad always had a camera with him, so I have a bunch of aerial photos of Vietnam during that conflict as well. And then I kind of always have just been around cameras. My dad handed me a camera before I went on my first deployment. It was like, take pictures, like we all did. You might as well. Um, and the real like portrait side of my photography career was spurned by disdain and vitriol for army spouse groups, and how everyone just buys a camera and assumes they're a photographer and charges way too much money in those. So my buddy Polanco was expecting a kid, and he was like, "Hey, like you have cameras around sometimes, like." Who do you think I should have do my photos? I was like, I don't know. I'll try it. If they suck, like go somewhere else. If they don't suck, like you still don't owe me any money. So went shot his, and they went surprisingly viral on some of the groups. And then dudes from my unit just, we got back from deployment. They started knocking the girls up, and it created an onslaught of maternity pictures in my first unit. So started doing those and just kind of got popular with it. Um, but it's evolved over time, and it's been cool to kind of like bring that along with me and very specifically hone into like my niche that I like to do. um, I know I'm big and ugly, but I'm a little creative as well. So it's a good outlet for that. And it's just fun to do. And
Here's
oh
for
God,
those wondering.
skip right
This is
past
good
that
stuff.
boudoir word. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's a good side hustle. It brings in some information and brings in some good money.
And
Um,
spake your mind, right?
yeah,
So
so I
for anyone
enjoy it a lot.
interested, just how to follow you, right?
You can
And
follow me at
how did you figure out, obviously now you're an MBA, but how did you figure out how to run that business? Um, what 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 did you do to figure out, everything from P&L to operations?
it's really I don't think it's necessarily a good example of that. Like I a lot of it is just trial and error, figuring out what works, figuring out my price range needed to be. understanding where I needed to set my price in order to weed out people that weren't serious clients, but not be so high to detract a large percentage of my affordable clientele. So it was just trial and error. And it's honestly, it was a huge pain in the ass because I PCSed or deployed so much that I never had a consistent client base. So that's something I'm actually kind of dealing with now, that I've settled in Atlanta for a little while. I'm kind of getting tied into the community. Um, and shooting what I want to shoot. I think that's step one is don't take everything. Do exactly what you want to do. I don't do family shoots. I don't do maternity sessions anymore. I don't do weddings inside churches. I don't do weddings inside conference centers. I don't do corporate like conference events. Those all are great money. I don't want to do them. I hate them. I think they suck. They're not my thing. Um, I do exactly what I want to do, and I know geographically what my price should be in order for me to be positive on my P&L because I really don't have any L anymore. And I don't do it for the money, so I can be flexible with what I want. So if a friend comes to me and says, "Hey, we're gonna, elope in Washington," I was like, "Cool, pay my travel. I want to go anyway. I work remote. You're just gonna fly me to Washington and put me up for 5 days in the mountains somewhere. I'm gonna work, so I'm still making money, and I'm gonna take cool pictures. So let's go." I'm trying to do it as more of an excuse to travel than
Yeah.
anything else. So it's just a lot
No,
of fun. And I
it's
never am going to do it full time because I enjoy it too much. If I do it full time, I'll become reliant on it, and I'm never going to make the money doing it that I do doing what I do now. Like it's just not possible, nor do I want to.
yeah, it's a pretty cool though when you can when your hobby can actually make you money, right?
Right?
Um,
Shout out
so
OnlyFans.
yes, which I guess that'll come from you soon enough, right? As, as as
Maybe.
as
I
soon
got a
as you get
pedicure
laid
last week, so you never know.
as soon as you get laid off, right? Although I don't know how in the market, for OnlyFans, 6'5", 255 pound men are, but you know,
265. Don't
two
cheat me
two
those 10
sixty five.
pounds.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
get it right.
you've gotten there. How much are you
Yeah.
deadlifting right now?
Not as much as I'd like to. Um, so I pulled 765 a couple months ago. The goal is 900 at some point, probably like 2 years away.
Okay.
May do a couple cycles to get there. Just kidding. Just kidding. Maybe.
What has fitness? I mean, what would you say? Obviously, fitness is a big deal, or should be a big deal to anyone that's
Yeah.
military, especially I feel like, amongst enlisted soldiers. That's how that's the to prove you're the alpha, right? What
Yeah.
does that look like coming out? I mean, what's switched?
Um, so it's been weird. It's always kind of been a staple for me. And after like really the like when I knew I was done with Accenture is when I didn't like doing anything. I didn't like going to the gym. I hated every aspect of my day. And that was like the final straw is when I stopped enjoying fitness is I was like, this is wrong. This is not how it should be. So that was like the nail in the coffin for that career. Um, but it's been a staple, and I would say my home life very much includes fitness, and it's been something reliable and consistent. I went a solid like year without running. I'm like, man, this is dumb. I'm never running again. And then probably like 6 months ago, I was kind of like, shit, I miss running. So I started that up again. It's just nice to have that one stable, reliable part of your day. And I am admittedly very much Enneagram type 1. I like structure in my day, so I structure my workouts. I plan what I'm doing the week prior. Um, and it's really cool. The organization I work for, I'll give them a shout out, Jackson Healthcare in Alpharetta, Georgia, the biggest private healthcare organization in the state of Georgia. They have a phenomenal gym on site. It's 3 stories. They got cardio, they got weights, they have like a 50-foot lap pool or a 40-foot lap pool, however long it is. Um, and they put a lot of emphasis on having a very healthy employee base. So like if I have days where it's very much like the army. So if I have a gap in the middle of my day, just like I did while I was, in the army, I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym for a couple hours. I'll be back to finish my day out if I'm in office, which is like twice a week max. Um, so it's always that part of the day. I've been on a kick lately, trying to wake up early and get in the gym by like 5:30. just to get that box checked and make sure nothing comes up weird because I'm at work all day and then I go to school all night, like 4 days a week. So making sure I get that in for my day is still important. I think it was Sergeant Major in the Army Daily that said it. It's not the most important thing you do that day, but it's the most important thing you do every day. And I still feel that. I still got that enlisted soul. So that's kind of a mantra that I'd like to stick to
Yeah.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
Also, I like to look enormous next to normal civilian people at work, which I do,
Yeah.
and it's
You
just
definitely
hilarious.
you definitely do. Although I think you look enormous next to most civilians. But that's yeah, a tribute to
Yeah,
your
genetics.
your genetics
Yeah,
and your lifting. Um, you just to finish up, you're at
yeah,
Scheller at Georgia Tech, and you're doing the evening program.
yeah.
What was the decision like to go get another degree as an MBA? Obviously, you had an MHA, and what have you thought of Scheller?
I think Shelley's really cool. I think the evening program is interesting because it allows you to work during the day. Like I didn't want when I got out, I didn't want another 2 years of not having a resume. And it's cool and all to go to school full time and jump off from there. But I was already kind of old when I joined the army, so I was already kind of old when I got out of the army. And I was like, I need to start working. Plus, I like to work, and I wanted to buy expensive but dumb things, which I have done successfully. So I really wanted to work while going to school. And it's been cool because everyone I go to school with in the evening classes, for the most part, also works full time. So instead of like reading case studies or looking at examples in a textbook, which I feel like a lot of full time programs, that's what they do. A lot of
That's
them
what
are
you
based
yeah.
on case studies. Um, it's
You
not
run
like, oh, well,
simulations. Yeah.
dude, simulations are so dumb,
Yeah. Everything's
in my
controlled.
opinion.
Everything's a very like, static environment
Yeah,
where four or five variables are changed at a time.
yeah, and that's great and all, and it's one way to learn. But in the evening programs, the professors we have will read the same case studies and be like, all right, cool, based on your experience that you've done in the corporate world, jobs you've had, how would you do this differently? It's not like, oh, what should Jenny from Target Corp do differently in this case study? It's like, all right, what would Tyler, the meteorologist that's getting his MBA, what would you do? So it's a different, again, I harp on it all the time, it's perspective, it's a different perspective. um, there are a lot of days where it just sucks. And like to go from a full day of work and then to have 5 hours, like Wednesday nights, I'm in class from 5 to 10 p.m. Like it's not easy.
Tough. Yeah.
And,
And it's two
and,
two
and it's,
years?
well, so the evening program at Scheller, you have to finish it in 6 years or less. They give you 6 years to do it. You can go at whatever rate you want. I wanted to be done. Like day one, I'm there to finish it. So I have been going full time, 12 credit hours a semester over 5 semesters just to finish the damn thing and be out. So I am fast tracking through it. You don't have to. You could like if you wanted to, slow roll the damn thing and do 2 classes on spring and fall only, you'd be done in 4.5 years. I'm not dragging my feet. I want out. So I'm just hauling as much ass as I can. And it's demanding. And honestly, I probably wouldn't be nearly as successful with it if my spouse wasn't so supportive with it. And, she covers down on a lot of the home front stuff, which I really appreciate. So that really enables me to be successful.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. How can other vets that are trying to figure out what they want to do, what's the best way to contact you and get in
Yeah.
touch?
Instagram is probably the easiest and it prevents anyone from having my damn phone number. But yeah, hit me up on Instagram. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. Although admittedly, like I don't use LinkedIn as much as maybe a lot of people in MBA programs do. But yeah, Instagram or LinkedIn, Steven Spake for LinkedIn, and then at Spake Your Mind on Instagram is the way to do it. Um, and I'm more than happy to have a completely candid conversation with anyone about it. It's been awesome. It's hard. There are some days where I definitely feel like it's not super worth it, but I'm really crossing my fingers that the end result is, and if all it takes is some hard work, let's get there.
Yeah. Well, anyone in Atlanta, I'm sure you'd go and grab a beer with them.
Absolutely.
If you live anywhere along the I-80 corridor, he also might randomly show up. Uh, so, watch out if you live
That's
along
true.
an interstate. He may
That's
just
true.
appear.
That
But
does make me
yeah,
sound like a serial killer, though.
you might be. I mean, who knows?
Love cereal.
So, anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much, Spake.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Anytime.